right, everybody. So it is 2 o'clock. We can go ahead and get started. And if you just joined us, again, thank you so much for being part of this community conversations. We usually do these once a month, and we get to bring amazing people on like Sarah. I'll go ahead and introduce her right now. Yeah.
Sure.
But they're unique opportunities that we have. So I highly encourage you all, please, if you have any questions, go ahead and include them in the chat and we'll get to them as the presentation goes on. We'll keep an eye, but they'll be answered at the very end. So I thank you all for joining us today. Thank you especially to Sarah here, because I know that with the amount of work that you all have, our in counseling therapy session
Right,
is incredible.
right.
Yeah, Sarah. So welcome. I'll go ahead and read your bio really quick and we'll get right to it. Is that okay
Okay,
with you?
sounds great. Thank you.
Awesome, Sarah. So Sarah is a trilingual, by the way. Wow, that's
Thank you.
trilingual associate marriage and family therapist here at Laura's house, where you provide individual, group, and child counseling in English, Spanish, and Farsi. Thank you so much for doing that. Sarah also facilitates the Dating After Abuse group, in which she helps clients explore reconstruction of their fears towards relationships to help them identify with their own values and opinions and options when moving forward, right? She uses her genuineness and empathy to help clients move towards a place of acceptance and empowerment. So, with that, Sarah, you do an incredible job.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for doing that. And I can't imagine all the preparation you must have gone through and to offer this in 3 languages. That is incredible. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it is a bit more challenging, doing therapy in different languages, but I think what's great is when you are kind of living in that language with another person, it can kind of just bring a different type of relationship, different things to uncover. So I like how each of those bring their own uniqueness.
Absolutely. You just became goals. That's amazing. Wonderful.
Sweet.
Awesome, Sarah. So we'll kind of go in and get started. I know we shared a couple of questions for you.
Mhm.
Today we're going to be talking about dating after abuse and how that may look like, sound like. We'll have a couple of questions from everyone here. But yes, I think unfortunately we've all either been there, known somebody who's been there, or seeing it in the media, right? We've all had some kind of exposure to it. So if we do see somebody going through it, a loved one, family member, do you have any suggestions for us as to maybe how to react or what to do in that case?
Sure. It's really hard. They want to go in and just fix. And I think can be similar being a therapist here. We're caring and empathetic. So I kind of can put myself in a family's shoes too.
Mhm.
A lot of different factors. I think being able to just notice how you can continue to be a support system for them, just because in these relationships, a common pattern we do see is that the abuser can really isolate this person, kind of
Mhm.
constantly telling them things as to why their family members, their friends, people who are a support system are not safe or healthy or good for them.
Mhm.
So being able to just kind of know, and I think that's why getting educated about what really goes on in this type of relationship is helpful for family members too. Having them have an outlet as well. If they have a group that they can kind of express how hard it is for them to see their family member go through this. So that way, we're just also being mindful of that we're not dumping either. We're not making that person feel worse about what they are doing. So just being mindful of that because they're already probably kind of going through a lot of shame and a lot of guilt,
Mhm.
but surely have their reasons for why they're staying.
Yeah.
But it does take time. Everyone has to reach their point until they kind of on their own feel confident and able to walk away.
Absolutely. And I love what you said, right? Sometimes by us trying to help as a support system, we actually end up doing a little bit more damage, right? Because we ask questions. So we're like, well, why don't you just go? Or we'll just
Hmm.
start fresh as if nothing happened. And we know that healing, like you just mentioned, is looks different for everybody at different timing.
Right.
and it's different for everyone. So thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
And do you have any tips for us as to maybe if we are in that situation, how to establish that boundary with the family member, or even in new partnerships, right? Like, how do we communicate what we're okay with and what we're not okay with?
Sure. Right. So it's funny, every question, my mind goes to all the layers that it has in the answer, but just, I think primarily the first piece. Oh, I think I lost my visual of you. There we go.
You
Okay,
did.
there we
Okay.
go. One piece too, I think, is being able to be okay with having a boundary. And what I mean by that is
Mhm.
there is some work towards kind of working through what are your barriers that get in the way of you um, being able to even say the words that represent the boundary for you, whether that's some codependency, feeling concerned about, if that person will like you or not like you, just this, again, something that would get in the way of setting that boundary. So wanting to kind of work through that personally.
Yeah.
Oh,
And for
there.
a lot, yeah, for a lot of us, we're not really used to setting those boundaries, right? Or we may
Right.
not even know what that sounds like. Um, can you think of any examples, or maybe, um, yeah, and then maybe an example that we can kind of put it into perspective for some people as to what that may sound like?
Sure. Well, looking at again, what's the purpose of the boundary? So essentially, we're doing it to help continue the relationship between these two people. So I think by pointing that out, and this is something that I think as a therapist, I kind of grow and build this skill too of having that kind of delicate, let's say, conversation and bringing it up because we don't want to stomp on feelings, but we're also being able to tackle something from exploding maybe a little bit later. So I think just being able to kind of reiterate too what you just shared about the purpose here, so we can continue our relationship, but pointing out how maybe something that's come up, I need to take a break. It's making me feel a little uncomfortable or irritated, and I think it would be just more helpful and more healthy for me to kind of have my own space, but being really specific too, when you can return also. So the part B, as in a sense, so that person isn't necessarily left out either, just wondering, well, what is this going to lead us to? So being able to be specific, why, what it would look like, and then when to expect you to come back and what would that look like. So that way it's kind of a wholesome response to a person.
Yeah, and I think you just mentioned something very important, timing, right? A lot of the times we want to make sure everything's great right away and
Mhm.
think that it's going to happen on its own. So
Right.
patience, I hear, is a big thing that we need to practice here.
Right.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, and then I know that obviously our experiences shape the types of partners we might look for, or even just starting to date. So let's say we have the courage again to start dating, right? After
Right.
abuse, after a toxic relationship. Do you have any pointers for us as to how we can recognize maybe red flags,
Hmm.
or things that are like sounding alarms, but we don't really want to look at? And
Right.
while I do that, I'll check the chat really quick, but I'll be here.
Okay, sure. I think that's the hot $1 million question when it comes to this topic of seeing red flags, being able to catch ourselves or catch the person. So, one thing that I really love to just bring up as I do this group is talking about the power of not just being educated. So, that's one part, of course, becoming educated on what are red flags. And at Laura's House, we do have a great program, the personal empowerment program. So, on paper, what's really helpful is to see just literally word for word what these red flags would look like, what they would sound like. So gaining that education is crucial. But the other piece that I think is just as important, sometimes more, is looking at, so if this person has this behavior, that's their red flag. How about how it's making you feel back at yourself? So this is your response to the red flag. And that's where I truly think there's much more information. Because when we kind of look at a person coming to therapy, seeing their past, I like to really understand what was your pattern in response to the abuser. So that way we can understand what kept you there? Was it possibly you minimizing the abuse they were doing, telling yourself it's not that bad, altering the way you're perceiving things
Mhm.
to fit a certain outcome? So, all of these things, again, just being really mindful of how this person is making you look inwards. I think that is
Mhm.
one of the biggest keys that we can help people identify with too.
Sarah, that was mind blowing. To switch, to really, because a lot of the times we focus on the outside, right? But that's incredible. Yeah, I mean, how did that make you feel? Maybe it's a red flag for me, but not for somebody else.
Right,
Yeah,
right, exactly, exactly.
I'm taking notes. You know, in an ideal world, how cool will it be to have a cheat sheet, right, of red flags? But
Mm,
that's not how this works. How
right,
people work in relationships. So,
right.
yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, sometimes we can have the cheat sheet, but we don't want to use it. There's something else that's louder for us. So being on to understand what are the other aspects that are kind of maybe more important, um, more loud.
In that relationship, right? No, that's amazing. And let's say we do come across one of these red flags, right? Maybe we feel it in our gut or just how the relationship is going.
Mhm.
Do you suggest we share that with our new potential partner who we're dating, or should we do more some self exploration? What can we do in that case?
Sure. Well, I think just being able to, in your own internal dialogue, asking, what do you want to get out of communicating this with
Mhm.
whoever it is? I think that's really helpful just to see what it is that you're looking for by even sharing to another person.
Mhm.
Um, Definitely having a support system. I know in the materials in the Dating After Abuse group, the very first week, we're actually talking about making sure to have your support system, whether it's a few family members who are, I want to add, also safe for you to share with.
Mhm.
So, not going to make you feel worse, essentially, for sharing this information, or friends. Um, with your partner, I very much encourage communicating if something made you uncomfortable and this was worth it for you to address because it's possibly getting in the way of a need as well in the relationship. Um, I like to think of as I was kind of preparing for this, I thought about also just a box, an image of a box. So it has these corners. So within those corners, I thought about these being kind of the boundaries you don't want to step out of, what you want, the reasons for sharing as well, so they can help kind of be reminders. And then what's on the inside of the box, that's the content that you want to share. But having these kind of frames around the box is helpful. When conversations come up, it's easy to get a little bit sidetracked. It might change the focus. So being able to also have this kind of visual box is helpful to know where you were coming from as well, and what your point was. So I think it is helpful. And again, I like to point out this is more information to see how is my partner responding to me being vulnerable with them? Is this fitting what I need also?
That's so interesting you say that because I know sometimes when we're in discussions, arguments, or talks, emotions kind of take over, right? And you
Right.
sometimes go on a tangent, or maybe you don't have the conversation. So that's a great exercise. Um,
Thank
would
you.
you say that it gets more doable with practice, or do it once or twice, try it out? I know a lot of us haven't done something like that before, so that would
Mhm.
be an awesome thing to give it a try.
Right, definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I also really enjoy what you said about finding your safe people, right? A
Mhm.
lot of the times we think that just because they are family or because they are friends, they are safe. But sometimes you need to reevaluate that, right? And see, well, who's right for me?
Right, right,
That's part of
exactly.
it.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I know, like I said, we can write a book on this. So
Mhm.
that's good to know. And again, for all those folks healing, in terms of a timeline, we
Mm,
always see articles or things on social media that
mm,
say, "Are you ready to date again?"
right.
Right? Or like when it's the right time to date. But from your perspective, is there maybe suggested milestone time? How do
Mm,
we know we're ready to date again?
right. So I
Mhm.
wish I had the exact timing. If that was possible. And of course, so just like in this field, so many things are, it depends as a response. I remember in grad school, I was always hearing that. So I'm bringing that as well here. But a few things that I think you can still take away from that can be for everyone. Just taking the time to, in a sense, dating yourself. And what I mean by that is having the routine that you do, whether it's going to work out, doing certain classes on certain nights of the week, journaling, having consistency in the support system. So having you, in a sense. And then doing some work, just figuring out, what is it that you need in a relationship?
Mm.
Um, and how ready are you to be able to express those things and not feel ashamed or embarrassed, to know that that's you and being okay with it, regardless of how the other person might perceive you. Um, and going from there as well, I think just essentially, especially if we're here talking about, coming out of an abusive relationship, I just like to point out too, just being very honest that there's no guarantee, no matter how much we get educated, do the work, there's no guarantee that nothing bad will happen ever again. So being able to kind of accept that these things can happen and they might, but instead of focusing on that, being able to focus on how you will still be there, how you'll still pick yourself back up no matter what. I think being able to have that belief in yourself, that's when you get a little bit more of an idea that you can do it. It's worth the risk because you're strong enough.
That's right. I never thought about it that way because we're so accustomed to seeing, well, what did my parents tell me a good relationship was? Or what should I look for in a guy or in a girl,
Mhm.
partner, right? So doing that at your own time can be scary. But if you do the work, like you said, you'll be stronger to get out into the world, right?
Right. And I want to add too, as well, I
Mhm.
think one of the biggest things, being able to regulate yourself. And what I mean by that is whatever the situation might be, something difficult at work, a life stressor, um, doing a little work to be able to be uncomfortable within yourself, um, being able to go through some negative feelings, and finding your own ways to essentially ground yourself, to bring yourself back up, whether it's journaling, playing certain music, whatever your routine is. Um, just so, again, it kind of gives you that sense of self before you dive into a relationship. I think that is also a really big one.
Yeah, to find out what you like, right? As a person, not what you guys like together or what they want you to like, but what you feel comfortable with.
Right, right.
So exploration, that's incredible.
Mm.
And so let's say we do start dating again, somebody not in the community. Should we communicate, for example, any triggers or even past dating experiences that we have with our
Mm.
new partners?
Right, right. So I know the sharing aspect can be a little bit controversial. So some people might say one yes, and some people might say no. I definitely think there's a lot to be said, though, of being able to share what reflects who you are now in this space where you are now, because that's where the person is also meeting you in this present moment.
Mhm.
So if there were things of the past that you feel are important because it continues to, let's say, highlight who you are now and how you want to proceed now, I think that that's completely fine. Um, but being able to know that your past is your past, you don't owe it to anyone to feel obligated to have to share. Um,
Mhm.
I think what gets a little tricky as well, with this kind of experiences, a lot of times, a lot of survivors, going through something so hard, coming out of it, and essentially being a survivor, that carries, a lot of weight in a great way and gives us strength. But I think what gets tough in that as well is sometimes when we're stuck in that survivor role, we also are really getting stuck in assuming that there's always going to be a battle. Something bad is always going to happen. So being able to kind of also bring hope for another relationship, a different type of relationship. So giving the ability to kind of show where you are now, because there's much more to someone than just what they survived.
Yeah, and that's beautiful to say because you're right. We may be so conditioned to expect the worst of the worst, right? In any relationship, or say, well, why aren't we arguing? Or this is how it used to be with my ex.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we hear that a lot, and we get that asked from the community. If somebody I am dating and saying, "Oh, my ex used to do this, my ex used to do that," um, would you say sometimes that's a way to communicate a trigger? It may not be the healthiest, but why do you think it's always on top of mind for them?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can imagine there's some protection there, wanting to kind of
Mhm.
avoid maybe something from repeating. So,
Yeah.
as much as I can understand the positive, the function from that, I think we have to be mindful too of, are we trying to control the relationship by sharing? So again, just looking at what's my intention for sharing. I think asking ourselves that before sharing is helpful as well. Um, so being able to just kind of know where you're going with what you want to share. So it's again a very open question.
Mhm.
If it makes someone feel empowered, I think that's great as well. I would just kind of go back to where I shared. What's coming up for you that needs that there is this push to make yourself feel empowered right now? Is that something that just makes you feel more at peace, or is it because this person is kind of pushing you to go there as well? So this is, again, very open-ended sort of answer, but I think bringing it back to also the intention of sharing, and again, bringing it back to, is this just representing where I am right now? Because that's where I'm living with this person as well, being in that present moment.
Absolutely. So I hear a lot of self-exploration, Sarah.
Yes, essentially.
Like, okay, what do I like? What I feel comfortable with? What are my expectations? Right. So it takes a lot of that self-reflection. And for that, I love how you mentioned a couple of ways to do that. You mentioned journaling, maybe finding out what kind of music you like. What if you don't know where to start? Should
Mm,
you reach out to someone or just give it a try and see what happens?
mhm. Are you pointing out, just double checking in terms of how to share your story, or how
In
could you?
terms of how do I explore what I like or my boundaries for myself, kind of that self exploration, self dating or dating
Mm,
yourself that you mentioned. How does
right,
one do that?
sure, sure. Well, I know with COVID things are a little trickier, but being able to still engage in some classes, if there's any hobbies that you've ever wanted to do,
Mm,
that dance class you were ever too shy about, kind of pushing yourself to enroll in it, even if you can't find a buddy to go with you, letting yourself kind of go there and see how you respond. And essentially, again, these are opportunities where we kind of get to see, how am I reacting? Did I like this? Did I not like this?
mhm,
And if it brings about some sadness or some anger or whatever the feelings are, again, we're giving ourselves the opportunity to be okay with not being okay also. And
mhm,
so from there, I think that's just that regulating that I mentioned being so important. But doing hobbies, let's say, um, going on trips. Not sure how
mhm.
most people feel about doing solo trips. I know that that's something that I've always loved. There's just an automatic self exploration as you are taking a trip by yourself. Whether if it helps to just drive somewhere not far away, spending a night somewhere yourself, taking that journal with you, putting on a movie so we can have that kind of company there, even if we're in that room by ourselves, if we're staying somewhere. Um, just giving into what it feels like to be single in this way also, so not having to fight it either. Again, just kind of getting used to the roller coaster of feelings too that come with dating yourself, being okay with that.
Absolutely. Especially, I can only imagine for survivors or community members that have been in toxic or unhealthy relationships, so
Mhm.
much of your identity has been tied to somebody else.
Right.
Right? So being on your own can be scary. And I really like the roller coaster example that you use because it's true. It'll change from time to time. Some days are going to be better than others,
Right.
and we have to work at it and get comfortable with being uncomfortable, like you
Right.
mentioned, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, healing is hard, Sarah. I wish there
It is. It
was.
very much is.
Wonderful. So I'll ask you another question that we have here. Let's see. Oh, is there a danger of substituting one abuse for another? For example, physical violence in a previous relationship. Would it be difficult to identify emotional abuse in another one?
Mhm. Sure. Well, I think this just brings it a lot back to how a person responds to some type of abusive behavior,
Mhm.
because that can carry out whatever kind of abuse it is, because again, that's our response to it. So I think it is possible to substitute. I definitely, in my work here, kind of heard about moving from one more extremely abusive relationship. And I put quotes just because emotional abuse, should be placed just as bad as physical abuse. But I know kind of have this way of looking at it. At least this person didn't hit me. It's not that bad. So I have seen, that it can transition.
Mhm.
So that does happen. And again, I think that's why it's so mindful when you do come out of this relationship, doing the individual therapy, going to groups, kind of getting educated so you can understand how you're responding. Are you minimizing whatever the abuse is? Are you denying yourself the effects it's having on you? Any sort of negative pattern that is kind of keeping you in that place. So I definitely think that it's possible.
Absolutely. And sometimes, like you mentioned, right, we don't really know where to start. Maybe it's
Mm,
therapy, groups, but it's about exploring what works for you and what you like. So that's
mm,
amazing. And in a perfect world, right, we would come out of that relationship and never do the same thing again.
right.
But it doesn't always work that way. We have to put a lot of work into it, but to heal, right?
Right. And I want to add too, something that I think is not really talked about much is just
Mhm.
working towards also kind of gaining again that acceptance of what happened. I do like to just kind of bring about a concept of looking at how sometimes, as basic as this sounds, but I do believe sometimes these things, they just happen as if a natural disaster as well. And when I say that, not to disregard being able to look at, where maybe you fell short or things you could have done better. But I bring this because this experience brings about a lot of shame for
Mhm.
people. And shame, I truly believe, is what keeps a lot of these cycles going. So I just like to bring that perspective of so it doesn't have to be so much of someone's fault. It can also just be an experience. So it's just a little piece that I like to bring to it.
Yeah, and that actually reminded me sometimes I've heard, or at least I've heard before where it says, well, what did I do to deserve it? Right?
Right.
Like why
Right.
me? Why do I keep choosing toxic partners, abusive partners? Like what am I doing wrong? As a support person or even a survivor myself, what would you say to that? How do you answer that question?
Right. Well, I think giving some space, surely everyone has some ideas as to if that's true. What's evidence that supports that you are someone who, let's say, attracts this type of partner. So really digging into, and this would be an individual therapy, what happened, going back to as cliche as it is, but going back to childhood sometimes, being able to see, was this modeled to you in your own home? Whether maybe it wasn't physical abuse, again, so we might think, no, we didn't have any of that. But there are these little moments that I like to bring about where you learned something. You picked up a message when you saw your parents, grandparents, whatever the situation might be, whoever are your primary caregivers, or you might have seen an interaction and you had a message taken away from that. So it might not have been even that explicit, but a lot of these things kind of implicitly, slowly on the inside, just might be there. And so when we are in that situation, it can be really familiar. And I cannot stress enough how much we choose what's familiar and not sometimes what's healthy for us.
Wow.
I had
Yeah.
a professor say that once, so those are not my words. But I find that to be proven time after time.
Yeah.
we are, really into habits and just what's familiar to us. Because essentially there is, in a way, even though it might be dysfunctional, there might be some function because
Mhm.
our families, these were the people who were supposed to be safe for us. And maybe there's elements of them who are, but they did kind of model some of these things, probably, unfortunately. Um,
Mhm.
so being able to just kind of go back to the origins, I think, is really helpful. But the other piece, too, I like to mention is
Mhm.
um, as a society, we love to put things in boxes and labels. And I just want to make a little space to look at another perspective of maybe there's some things that you're attracted to that other people are defining as not healthy for you. But if it's healthy for you and you have decided that, I think that's okay also. So being able to just kind of understand yourself that much more and being accepting of who you are and what you like, because it doesn't have to match what everybody else likes in a relationship. So,
Crazy. All right, Sarah, you're dropping gems here because it's true, right? Like we have to see what works for us. And I really like what you mentioned about, again, it kind of goes back to that self-exploration, but to finding out what works for you, what doesn't, and the part of being with someone, with a partner because it's comforting or familial or because it's what you know, that is a great thing to question, right? Like why, when you ask yourself, why am I choosing this type of partner again? It's like, maybe it's something I need to look into
right,
inside, right? That's crazy.
right.
We do have another question along the same line that
Sure.
says, what are some of the unhealthy patterns that we can identify in a relationship?
Mm,
And maybe I think it would be great if we can see an example of that, maybe something that isn't unhealthy. Because when we talk about dating abuse, a lot of us as community people, we're like, oh, my relationship isn't abusive. It's
right.
probably not the best, but it's just verbal or it's
Mm,
just emotional. Like it's not an abusive relationship. We try to not associate with that, right? So
mm,
how can we identify if it's unhealthy or maybe there are some unhealthy patterns?
mhm. Sure. Well, I think one kind of just putting it in a real life circumstance or example, to make a relationship work, since there are two people and each person brings their own personality triggers, whatever it might be, to the table. Being able to, of course, which is hard enough, but being able to kind of verbalize when something is troubling you that maybe your partner did. So expressing, like we touched on a little bit earlier, what the trigger was, whatever it was that upset them. If we're coming from, again, a compassionate place, we're very objective and specific with what it was that the partner did that made us also feel this way. So taking responsibility of your own feelings, and you can even take that up a notch and even kind of requesting exactly what it is that you prefer this person to do. So these are all great things you can do. But I think where we can kind of see if something is unhealthy is pointing out, again, how is this person responding to me, and how it makes me feel after. So if you've come forward and kind of shared, put yourself out there, and this person, let's say, makes you feel shameful for expressing yourself, essentially, calling you names. Even if, let's say, the insults aren't there, it could be someone's tone. Again, it might not be intentional, of course. And again, that's where this conversation should continue and just kind of in that still compassionate way. So there's a solution. But if these responses to you being vulnerable with your partner take you to a place where you feel ashamed, make you feel the same way that possibly an abusive person made you feel. Again, I keep bringing it back to the relationship you have with yourself. Um, so I think that's where we can kind of start to just notice the responses, what they're doing, and how they're making us feel.
Right. If we're being dismissed or like you mentioned, right, if they trigger us a familial toxic, then that's probably when you'll know it's unhealthy for you. And if
Mhm.
you don't always have the same red flags, the same feelings about things, so that actually helps. Wow, thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that.
Well, and I think the other aspect as well too, and we have a group at Laura's house for codependency,
Mhm.
is also, I think, a pattern that can come up too. And just, it can be very natural because we care for this person. We're in a relationship with them. But I think couples sometimes too, and this could definitely have been modeled in the home, is just when we are going through a conflict, let's say, each person, I think this is where we kind of dive into the unhealthiness, the codependency too, is this need to really make sure that that person is okay. But to the point where we're not giving them their space, their way of coping, of calming down. So maybe, chasing after them, not letting them walk away if they need to cool down. Continuing to really bring it up to the point it's making them uncomfortable by repeating, "Are you okay? Is what I did wrong?" Again, just kind of, if we're falling into a pattern, which I point out with clients too, is it sounding like a person is the parent and the other is a child? So again,
Mm.
just kind of pointing out too, are the roles staying equal here?
Got it. Right. If that control or that power is leaning more towards a partner and the other partner is kind of giving in, that's more of a parent-child role. Did I understand
Right.
that right? Yeah.
Right, because I start to hear, as working here as well, this fear of, let's say, being punished. They'll
Mhm.
make you feel bad or embarrassed about yourself. So again, that's where I start to kind of pick up. Sounds like there's more of this type of relationship rather than, two equal
Mhm.
individuals coming together.
Absolutely. And sometimes, I mean, I've seen it where we do that to please others, right? Or
Hmm.
we avoid saying no, setting boundaries to not ruffle any feathers or to keep peace in the home.
Right,
So
right.
that's a lot to unpack there. Yeah.
I know.
We have another question here that says, I've heard it said that we find the same package, just different wrapping. How can we identify if we are attracted to harmful patterns? So I guess going back to that, right?
Mhm,
Like you mentioned earlier, sometimes we don't notice it when we pick the same kind of person or
mhm.
personality or type of person. And if we find ourselves in that situation, what do you suggest we do? What's the first step there?
Mhm. To see that you've fallen in a similar relationship?
Yes, if you repeatedly see like, oh my gosh, I keep dating the same pattern, person,
Mm,
characteristic,
right,
it's like I pick them like that, right?
right.
What do you feel like we should do first?
Mhm. Well, I think whether it's, journaling or having that safe person, um, whatever the door is to open it for you, but being able to look at, um, having that conversation of, is there a part of me that deserves this same type of relationship?
Mm,
I just think that self-worth has a lot to do with the type of relationships that we sustain as well.
mhm,
And I use the word sustain and maintain because we're just choosing to kind of go through it. It's more of a day by day.
mhm,
And so if we are, living within our values, our actions match our words, we are
mhm,
genuine with ourselves, we're proud of what we see in the mirror. These are things that make us or make anyone feel more worthy and deserving of the best relationship for themselves. And not settling for all of these almosts. I
mhm,
heard it in a great podcast, so I can't use that concept for myself. But essentially, the more we do kind of go in these relationships, naturally, again, it's just very natural to kind of understand and assume this is the best that I will get. This is what I deserve because we are continuing to be seeing the same, just this much. We can't go there. We
mhm.
just have to keep going here. And so again, that just kind of gets us further. So I think being able to have a conversation with yourself of, how am I understanding my self-worth here? Where do I fall um, in this topic? So being able to have that conversation.
Ooh, you heard that, everybody. Don't settle. Just because it's better doesn't mean it's the best, right? Or it can't get anything.
Easy to say, really hard to do because we all want love and we all want companions, and that's just how we are. So it's hard.
Yeah, that could be our nature, right? If we see that
Yeah.
it's a little bit better, we're like, well, what if this is it? What if I miss my chance?
Right.
So you have that little voice on you. Oh gosh, yeah. And I actually wanted to introduce one of the questions we have on the chat because I think
Sure.
it kind of fits in here. And it was something I didn't really think about. So they're asking us, you mentioned communicating, your red flags or your boundaries. And the question was, can I do that over text or over social media?
Oh,
Huh.
sure. Hmm.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I think hmm, I would want to understand why you're choosing to do it over text. Is there something you're trying to protect? Is it a little easier, less vulnerable? Um, I would probably shoe on the side of no. The reason why is because you're not able to see that person's authentic response to what you're saying right in front of you. And
Mm,
again, I cannot reiterate enough how much that's information for you to know, is this going to be the right person for me? Are they able to genuinely kind of give me what I need? And so I would just say that over a text, that person can construct any perfect message for you. So, not to say that you shouldn't trust it someone
mm,
and be paranoid all the time,
mm,
but really being able to see how they are in person. And again, seeing how does this lead to a conversation? Because can it lead to a natural flow? Or am I getting the feeling that this person put a wall, that they're not understanding me? So, again, a lot of it coming back to just how you feel in response to their response.
absolutely. And yeah, I think that's, I mean, even with us, right, as colleagues, sometimes obviously we communicate over text, but it's more of a like a factual. But if you try to communicate feelings and communicate or seeing somebody's reaction, you can't really read that over text. So I think
Right.
that's interesting. And in the times that we're living in, especially with a lot of our dating apps and dating
Mm-hmm.
websites, we have heard a lot about that. So that's quite
Right.
interesting.
Right.
I know. Crazy world out there right now.
Right.
We also had another question. Let's
Mhm.
see. It says, um, in terms of timing and healing, would the same apply if there were kids involved?
Mm.
I'm assuming they have kids.
And healing, right. I know with kids, it's a whole other layer on top just because that's another relationship. Um, I think it would be a little bit different. Just because they have feelings, and like I said, that's another relationship. I think with that, we really want to work on the relationship you have with the child, especially in terms of the way that they come to you with feelings and concerns. We do have a week in dating after abuse where we do look at that for moms as well, or dads. So I think making sure to also, again, depends how young the children are, that can make it a little bit tricky. um, but having that openness with them, kids can get very confused, and parents, out of their best interests, don't want to harm their children, so they may have hid the abuse or minimized it to their kids, so the kids continue to have a relationship with the abuser possibly. So again, very tricky there. But being able to kind of have an honest dialogue and answering any of their questions, so that child as well can kind of have an understanding of what happened, and why this new person is coming in, if this person is choosing to kind of introduce a new partner. So just making sure that that child can come to you and is comfortable coming to you. I think that's some work to do before kind of diving in again.
Absolutely. And sometimes, as maybe as parents or just community, we try to protect our kids the most, right? But
Right.
sometimes um letting them know and including them is the best way to keep them in the conversation and their feelings.
Right.
And kids are so smart.
Very.
The older I get, I'm like, you're so intuitive and smart and you know
Mhm.
what's happening.
Oh,
So
yes.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. And they're very resilient. I like to add too, just like anyone, just that notion of, we kind of assume people are more fragile than they actually are. And I know as therapists, we have to be mindful of that too. But kids are really resilient. I think it's more harmful when you kind of alter things for them, because then you're also making it confusing. And that later on can be unhelpful for them when they grow up and they get in relationships. So just making it kind of open is just so important.
Absolutely. Well, childhood, like you mentioned earlier, has a lot to do with it, right? We say it's a little cliche, like you mentioned, but it's true. What you
Yeah.
experienced shapes a lot of who we are and who we choose and what we do.
Right.
So that's awesome. Awesome. So we have another question here. Oh, they
Mhm,
want to know more about groups. So how do you join or
mhm.
how long they are? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. So this group, it's a closed group. So that's what's beautiful about it. Everyone really forms a relationship.
Mhm.
It is for 8 weeks. So right now the groups I've kind of kept it Thursdays, and we're doing it in person. So from 5:30 to 7:30. And so each week we have a little bit of materials we'll go over. And in the materials, there's some information, there's also exercises or questions. And so just kind of through that and the open conversation between people in the group, just sharing and being able to kind of relate on experiences. Again, a variety of different topics we cover. So whether that's, previous relationships, um, one week we're talking about how if you have children, how that comes into play. We have a week where we talk about healthy sex. Where did you learn your beliefs about sex? Any of them that have been unhelpful. And so just a bunch of different topics in relation.
That's really cool because it does take all aspects almost of relationships and dating, right?
Right.
Like you may not have think of it, and I'm assuming that there's a lot of questions, or sometimes you feel alone where you're like, oh gosh, how do you even start dating after, right? So
Mhm.
it's a
Right.
different type of support than individual therapy. So I encourage you all, if you haven't had, if this is kind of your first exposure to it or your first time taking therapy, there's wonderful people like Sarah that have so much knowledge and I think it shows that you care. And so there's a lot of resources and avenues where people can start, right? So
Right. Definitely.
that's awesome. I'll go ahead and take another quick look at our chat just to make sure I didn't miss anyone. And meanwhile, Sarah, is there anything that maybe we didn't ask or go through that you like to add? No pressure there, just in case any thoughts came in last minute.
Mhm.
Mm.
I think just a general message, as the strength in being able to, I think, work towards a healthy relationship. I just can't stress enough how much it really comes back to how we feel about ourselves. So the more we work towards kind of normalizing our sensitivity, if we cry, if we have these ways of being and just being okay with them, being proud of them, being comfortable with them, because truly that is what's attractive, not only for yourself, but for others around you. As cliche as it might sound, though, it really is what I think makes a relationship work. And just so, like I said, kind of working through that, whatever that is for someone, to just be proud of being them. And I think the rest will all just follow through from there.
That's amazing. And I think a lot of the times, right, they ask us like, well, just give me the key, just give me the recipe and I'll follow it. I'll do it.
Right,
And when people find out that most of the work is done with yourself first, it's kind of like, oh, so I have to be good on my own to be good with someone else. That's
right,
weird.
right, right. Exactly.
That's awesome. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for everybody that is logged on. Or if you are watching this at a later time, just know that the conversation doesn't have to stop here. We thank Sarah for spending this time with us today. This was your chance to kind of get those questions in live. But if you need extra resources or maybe have additional questions, we can always, Sarah, if you're comfortable, share contact
Oh,
information.
please. Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
absolutely. And we'd love to, hopefully anybody out there needing healing or maybe finds himself alone. If you don't have the support as safe person,
Mhm.
just know that you can always reach out and we'll do our best to support you in the best way that we can.
Right, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the space. And I know I can't see everyone that's in this chat, but I thank everyone for being here. And if you are in a place where you do want some healing, we are here for that. And so thank you for just having me and being able to share.
Absolutely, Sarah. And we'll see you around. We know you're going to continue the work that you're doing, which is amazing. And again, my hat off to you with the amount of languages that you cover and topics and everything.
Thank
That is
you.
incredible. You're an amazing professional and human
Thank
being.
you so
So
much.
we're so
Thank you.
happy you're part of the team.
Me too. It's amazing to be here. It really, truly is.
Yeah. Awesome, Sarah. Well, everybody and Sarah, thank you again so much for your time. And I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.